I was 7 years old the first time my father told me I was destined for greatness. We were sitting in his study, the room where he kept his awards, his diplomas, his framed newspaper clippings. The walls were covered in proof of his worth. He placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "You have something I never had. Potential without limits. Don't waste it." I didn't understand what he meant then. I only understood that I had been given something precious, something I could lose if I wasn't careful. So I became careful. I became precise. I became the son who never failed. Every test, every project, every competition I won. Not because I wanted to, but because failure wasn't a possibility I could afford to consider. My father didn't demand perfection. He didn't have to. His silence when I brought home a 98% was louder than any scolding. His pride when I brought home 100 was the only warmth I knew. By the time I was 16, I had built a life that looked flawless from the outside. Valedictorian, captain of the debate team, early acceptance to an Ivy League university. My teachers called me exceptional. My classmates called me untouchable. My father called me his legacy. But inside I was collapsing. Every success felt like a tightrope I had to walk again. Every achievement became a new standard I couldn't fall below. I stopped sleeping well. I started checking my work 5, 6, 7 times. I rewrote essays until my hands cramped. I studied until my vision blurred. And still I was terrified it wouldn't be enough. No one noticed. Or maybe they did, and they mistook my anxiety for ambition. Either way, I learned to smile through it. I learned to make perfection look effortless, even when it was killing me. Then came the scholarship competition. A full ride to the university my father had always dreamed of attending but never could. It was a national competition, the kind that only accepted the top 1% of applicants. My father didn't say much when I told him I'd been selected as a finalist. He just nodded and said, "This is what we've been working toward." I spent 3 months preparing. I memorized every question format, every judging rubric, every possible angle of attack. I wrote and rewrote my essay 42 times. I practiced my presentation until I could deliver it in my sleep. I didn't go to my best friend's graduation party. I didn't go to prom. I didn't do anything that wasn't directly related to winning. The day of the final round, I felt calm. Not the calm of confidence, but the calm of someone who had done everything humanly possible to prepare. I walked into that auditorium believing I had already won. Because I always won. The first 2 rounds went perfectly. My essay scored in the top 3. My presentation earned a standing ovation from 2 of the judges. By the time I reached the final interview, I was certain. This was mine. Then they asked me a question I hadn't prepared for. It wasn't a difficult question. It wasn't even a trick question. It was simple, almost conversational. "Why do you want this?" I froze. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because the answer that came to mind wasn't one I could say out loud. I wanted it because my father wanted it. I wanted it because I didn't know who I was without it. I wanted it because I was terrified of what would happen if I didn't win. So I gave them the answer I thought they wanted to hear. I talked about opportunity, about service, about making a difference. I smiled. I was articulate. I was polished. But I wasn't honest. 3 weeks later, I got the letter. I didn't win. I came in second place. Close but not close enough. The scholarship went to someone else. I sat in my room, holding that letter, and I realized something. For the first time in my life, I had failed. And the world hadn't ended. The sky hadn't fallen. My father's disappointment was real, but it was survivable. What wasn't survivable was the realization that I didn't know how to be anything other than perfect. I didn't know how to lose. I didn't know how to try and fall short and still believe I was worth something. The days after the letter felt like walking through water. Everything was slower, heavier, harder to move through. My father didn't yell. He didn't rage. He just stopped talking to me about the future. He stopped asking about my plans. He stopped looking at me the way he used to, like I was the answer to a question he'd spent his whole life asking. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself second place was still an achievement. I told myself I could recover from this, that one failure didn't define me. But the truth was, I didn't believe any of it. Because I had spent my entire life building an identity around one thing: being the son who never failed. And now I had. My mother tried to comfort me. She said all the things mothers are supposed to say. That she was proud of me. That I had worked so hard. That one competition didn't change who I was. But even she couldn't hide the worry in her eyes. She knew what my father expected. She knew what I expected of myself. I went to university that fall. The same one I'd been accepted to, even without the scholarship. My father took out loans. He didn't complain, but I felt the weight of it every time I walked past his study and saw him sitting at his desk, staring at spreadsheets, calculating the cost of my presence in his life. I told myself I would make it up to him. I would graduate top of my class. I would prove that the scholarship didn't matter, that I was still exceptional, that I was still worth the investment. So I did what I had always done. I worked harder, but something had shifted. For the first time, the work didn't feel like it was leading somewhere. It felt like I was running on a treadmill, exhausting myself without ever moving forward. I got perfect grades, but they felt hollow. I joined the honor society, but I didn't care. I was going through the motions of being exceptional, but I no longer believed in it. And then I met her. Her name was Claire. She was in my ethics seminar, and she was the only person in the room who didn't seem impressed by my answers. When I spoke, she listened, but not with admiration. With skepticism. Like she could see through the polished surface to the emptiness underneath. One day after class, she stopped me in the hallway. "You don't actually believe any of that, do you?"
Ist daher.
"Believe what?" "The things you say, the arguments you make. You're smart, I'll give you that. But you don't believe a word of it. You're just saying what you think will get you the best grade." I should have been offended. I should have defended myself. But instead, I felt something crack open inside me. Because she was right. We started talking. Not about class, but about everything else. She told me about growing up in a family that didn't expect anything from her, and how that freedom had been both a gift and a burden. I told her about my father, about the weight of his dreams, about the scholarship I lost. She didn't offer sympathy. She offered something more dangerous. Honesty. "You know what I think?" she said one night, as we sat in the library long after everyone else had gone home. "I think you're terrified of finding out who you are without all of this. Without the grades, without the achievements, without your father's approval. I think you've spent so long being perfect that you don't know how to be real." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. But I couldn't, because she wasn't. That semester I made a decision. I stopped chasing perfect. I stopped rewriting essays 7 times. I stopped checking my work obsessively. I let myself be good enough instead of flawless. And for the first time in my life I felt like I could breathe. My grades slipped. Not dramatically, but noticeably. I went from straight A's to a mix of A's and B's. My professors stopped singling me out as exceptional. My father stopped asking about my academic performance altogether. And I kept waiting for the world to end. For everything to fall apart. For the proof that I had been right all along, that without perfection, I was nothing. But it didn't happen. The strange thing about letting go of perfection is that no one else seemed to notice. My friends didn't treat me differently. My professors didn't write me off. Even my father, in his silence, didn't seem to register the shift. It was as if the world had been waiting for me to stop performing, and now that I had, it simply accepted me as I was. But I noticed. I felt it in my body first. The way my shoulders unclenched when I sat down to study. The way I could close my laptop at midnight instead of working until 3 in the morning. I felt it in the way I stopped checking my email every 5 minutes, waiting for confirmation that I was still valuable. Claire noticed too. "You seem lighter," she said one afternoon as we walked across campus. "Like you're not carrying something anymore." "I don't know if I'm lighter," I admitted. "I think I'm just tired of holding on so tight." She smiled. "That's the same thing." By the end of that year I had changed majors. I switched from pre-law, the path my father had mapped out for me, to philosophy. It wasn't a practical choice. It wasn't a prestigious choice. It was the first choice I had made purely because I wanted to. When I told my father, he didn't explode. He didn't lecture me. He just looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Disappointment mixed with something else. Grief, maybe, or resignation. Philosophy, he repeated, as if testing the word in his mouth. And what exactly do you plan to do with that? I don't know yet, I said, and for the first time I didn't feel the need to lie. He nodded slowly. I see. Then he left the room. My mother found me later that night. He'll come around, she said softly. He just needs time to adjust. He had so many plans for you. I know, I said, but they were his plans, not mine. She didn't argue. She just hugged me and said, I hope you know what you're doing. I didn't, but I was learning. The next 2 years were the hardest and the best of my life. I struggled in ways I had never struggled before. Not because the work was too difficult, but because I was finally doing work that mattered to me. I read books that challenged everything I thought I knew. I wrote papers that weren't perfect but were honest. I had conversations that lasted until dawn, not because I was trying to win an argument, but because I genuinely wanted to understand. And I started to figure out who I was when I wasn't trying to be exceptional. But my father's silence grew heavier. He stopped asking about school altogether. He stopped calling as often. When I came home for holidays, the conversations were polite but distant, as if we were strangers sharing a meal out of obligation rather than connection. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was finally living my own life, and that was worth the cost. But late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I would think about the look on his face when I told him I was changing majors. The way something in him had broken, and I wondered if I had failed him after all. The breaking point came during my senior year. I was writing my thesis, a dense, theoretical exploration of moral responsibility and the nature of choice. It was the hardest thing I had ever written, not because of the complexity, but because it forced me to confront questions I had been avoiding my entire life. One night, exhausted and stuck, I called my father. I don't know why. Maybe I was hoping for encouragement. Maybe I was hoping he would finally tell me he was proud of me for following my own path. Instead, he asked, "When are you going to stop playing around and do something real with your life?" I felt the words like a physical blow. "This is real," I said quietly. "This matters to me." "It matters to you," he repeated. "And what about the rest of us? What about the sacrifices we made so you could have opportunities one never had? You think philosophy is going to pay back those loans? You think ideas are going to take care of your mother and me when we're old? I never asked you to sacrifice anything for me," I said, and my voice was shaking now. "I never asked to carry your dreams." There was a long silence. Then he said, "I thought you were different. I thought you understood what it meant to build something meaningful. But you're just like everyone else. Selfish, short-sighted, wasting your potential." And then he hung up. I didn't speak to my father for 6 months after that phone call. It wasn't a conscious decision at first. I just didn't call, and neither did he. My mother would text me occasionally, asking how I was, telling me about small things happening at home. She never mentioned him, and I never asked. I finished my thesis. I graduated. Not with highest honors, but with honors nonetheless. My mother came to the ceremony. My father didn't. Afterward, standing in my cap and gown while my classmates celebrated with their families, my mother pulled me aside. Her eyes were red, though she was trying to smile. "He wanted to come," she said quietly. "He really did. He just couldn't." "Couldn't or wouldn't?" I asked, and I hated how bitter I sounded. She didn't answer. She just hugged me tighter than she ever had before. I moved to a different city after graduation. I got a job teaching at a small private school. Nothing prestigious, nothing my father would have considered worthy of my education. But I liked it. The students were curious and difficult and real. They didn't care about my perfect record. They just wanted someone who could help them think more clearly about the world. And slowly I started to rebuild myself. Not as the son who never failed, but as someone who had failed and survived. Someone who was learning to measure success by different standards. But I thought about him constantly. I thought about the weight he carried, the dreams he never got to pursue, the life he sacrificed so I could have more. I thought about the way his face used to light up when I brought home an award, when I told him I'd been accepted somewhere competitive, when I proved I was everything he hoped I would be. And I wondered if I had been cruel to take that away from him. 1 year after graduation, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was different, thin, fragile, like glass about to break. "It's your father," she said. "He's in the hospital. Heart attack. They don't know if he's going to make it." I was on a plane within hours. When I arrived at the hospital, my mother looked like she had aged a decade. She took my hand and led me to his room. He was asleep, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed, keeping him alive. I sat beside his bed and looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in years. He looked smaller than I remembered. Frilier. Human in a way I had never allowed him to be. My mother left us alone. I don't know how long I sat there, watching him breathe. Eventually, I started talking. "I know you're disappointed in me," I said quietly. "I know I'm not the son you wanted me to be. I'm not exceptional. I'm not building the life you dreamed of. I'm just trying to figure out how to be myself." He didn't respond. The machines kept beeping. "But I need you to know something," I continued, and my voice was breaking now. "I spent my whole life trying to be perfect for you, and it almost destroyed me. I don't blame you for that. I know you were just trying to give me something you never had. But I can't live that way anymore. I can't keep trying to be someone I'm not." I wiped my eyes. "And I need you to be okay with that, because I'm still your son, even if I'm not the son you imagined." The room was silent except for the machines. Then, quietly, I heard him say, "I know." I looked up. His eyes were open. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. "I know," he repeated, his voice weak but steady. "And I'm sorry." My father recovered. Not completely, his heart was damaged, and he would never be as strong as he once was, but he survived. And in the weeks and months that followed, something between us began to shift. At first, the conversations were awkward. We didn't know how to talk to each other without the scaffolding of my achievements to hold us up. But slowly, we found other things to discuss. He told me stories about his own father, about the expectations that had crushed him, about the dreams he had abandoned to provide for our family. I told him about my students, about the small victories of helping someone understand a difficult concept, about the quiet satisfaction of a life that didn't look impressive from the outside but felt meaningful from the inside. One evening, about 3 months after his heart attack, we were sitting on his back porch. The sun was setting, and the air smelled like cut grass in summer. "Can I ask you something?" he said, not looking at me. "Of course. Do you regret it? Changing your path? Giving up the future you could have had?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. "I don't think I gave up a future. I think I traded one version of myself for another. And no, I don't regret it. But I understand why you do." He nodded slowly. "I wanted so much for you. I wanted you to have everything I didn't. And when you chose something different, it felt like all of it had been for nothing. All the sacrifices, all the work. Like I had failed as a father." "You didn't fail," I said. "You gave me something I could have never given myself. You showed me what it looks like to want more, to fight for more. I just had to figure out what more meant for me." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm proud of you. I don't know if I've ever said that without conditions, but I am. You're not the son I imagined, but you're a better man than I ever was." I felt something break open in my chest, something that had been held too tight for too long. "Thank you," I said. We sat there together as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I didn't have to be anything other than exactly who I was. My father died 2 years later, quietly, in his sleep with my mother beside him. By then, we had rebuilt something between us. Not the relationship we once had, but something softer, more honest, more real. At his funeral, I spoke. I told the truth about him, not the sanitized version, but the complicated one. I talked about his expectations, his disappointments, his love that sometimes felt more like pressure. And I talked about the grace he showed me in the end, when he let go of the son he wanted and accepted the son he had. Afterward, a former student of his came up to me. Your father used to talk about you, she said. Toward the end. He said you were the bravest person he knew.
Esther daher.
He said that. She nodded. He said it takes courage to fail, and even more courage to rebuild yourself afterward. I think about that often now. I think about the version of myself who never failed, who lived his entire life inside a prison of perfection. And I think about the version I became, flawed, uncertain, but free. I teach my students that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's the price of honesty. It's what happens when you stop performing and start living. And I tell them what I wish someone had told me when I was younger. That the most important thing you can build in this life isn't a perfect record. It's a self you can live with. My father's study is different now. My mother cleared out the awards, the diplomas, the framed clippings. In their place, she hung photos. Of me as a child. Of our family. Of ordinary moments that once seemed insignificant but now feel like everything. I visit often. And when I sit in that room, I don't feel the weight of expectations anymore. I just feel the quiet presence of a man who loved me the best way he knew how, and a son who learned to love him back. Not perfectly, but honestly, and in the end that was enough.